Welcome to the Bulimia podcast with guest Andrea Epting. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lorianne. I am the host of Bulimia. And today I have Andrea Epting with me. I am so pleased to have her. She is a psychotherapist, podcast host, fellow podcast host, speaker, and author specializing in the treatment of trauma initiated by process disorders. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
And I know that there's going to be a lot of relevant information here. So listeners, please, pay attention because this is going to be a good one. Not that they aren't all, but there is a lot of relevant information. So Andrea, what prompted you to get into this field of helping people?
Okay, so I think it was, 2003 maybe. I started working in chemical dependency, and I was working in intensive outpatient level of care, and I just kind of like developed this reputation for working really, really well with people struggling with dependencies on stimulant chemicals. And after a while, you know what, they would get clean, they would get sober, chemically sober, and then those behavioral addictions would come out with a vengeance. And I noticed when I was working with cocaine dependency, working with Adderall and Vyvanse and all of these things, oftentimes it was an eating disorder that would emerge, and also sexual compulsivity. And so those two things became like really my area of expertise and focus. And so I started really diving deep into the realm of trauma initiated process addictions and disorders like mood and food disorders and sexual compulsivity. And so just working a lot with that, because we'd work with the chemical piece and people would heal and move into recovery. And then we work on the behavioral aspects and they would heal and move into recovery. And then we would work on the emotional aspects. And it's just been wonderful work, and I'm blessed to be able to do it.
So when you say, I'm curious, so when you say process disorders, can you define that a little bit better for the listeners?
Yes. So people use the word addiction, probably still most often, most common. And as we understand addictive diseases to develop over a period of time and increase in tolerance, people also use the word compulsivity. And that word is most commonly used when we're talking about behavioral addictions, okay? Because it is compulsive and we can't always necessarily stop the behavior. It would be unhealthy to stop consuming food. It would be unhealthy to stop engaging in healthy forms of sexual activity. So a lot of these behaviors that have become extremely high risk and causing a lot of damage and consequences in people's lives, when we talk about compulsivity, we have to really manage it in a way that's not as simple as abstinence like you can from chemicals. And what emerged from that was more of a language of process disorders, process addictions, because of the way that it works on the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and brain functioning. And so it's really just a matter of what you feel most comfortable using, I believe.
Very interesting. Speaking to the emotions, in fact, my previous episode, we spoke a lot to that, how, and you're right, once you recover from bulimia, then you have to deal with the emotions that you were eating. And we also brought up the fact that, substance abuse, you can cut it out completely out of your life, but you can't food. And I like that you brought up sex as well. I mean, you can cut it out, but there's healthy behaviors to go with that. So I'm interested in when you're talking about emotional, like how, if you have a process, is there something you could speak to that? Because really, to me, that was my biggest struggle after I recovered, was dealing with my emotions.
Oh, yeah. And that's why we work it in that order. The chemical piece is not as challenging on us mentally, emotionally, physiologically as the behavioral piece. And then the emotional piece is the most challenging of all. We've got all of this that's so wired and ingrained and embodied, right? And so while you can disconnect from a chemical or a behavior, you're left to wrestle with all of that rewiring process, right? And so I think the emotional element is always going to be the most challenging. Mhm.
So when you're helping someone, is there a process that you go through? I mean, I know everybody's different, but there's usually a general process of like, so awareness, what would be
Yeah. And so
your
by
view on
the
that?
time somebody is ready to do the work on the emotional level and really move into that form of health, wellness, and sobriety, we're looking at the trauma and we're going deep into the trauma. And I'm not saying we don't look at it as we're moving through a recovery process. But at that point, people are ready and able because they're stable behaviorally, chemically. So, they're stable. They're ready to do deeper level work. So they start to address things like negative core beliefs. They start to really look at not just thoughts and thinking, but the embodied sensations and the responses that they get from certain stimuli. They start to really work and address their nervous system on a deeper level. They start to really look at how those negative core beliefs impact the way they show up in the world and particularly in relationships. They start to look at those other elements of life, and gosh, where they're like, gosh, I keep showing up this way and I don't love the results. And I think that's really where we start to dive in, is looking at unwanted patterns, not just behavioral patterns, but even just reactions and responses.
And I've spoke to this before. When we say trauma, people will always think of something horrible that happened.
Mhm.
But I believe that there could be an accumulation of small traumas that were
Yeah.
not dealt with, right, over time. And then it becomes like a snowball, right?
Yeah. And I think when I look at or think about what is trauma, and some people talk about adverse childhood experiences, which, of course, over the period of time or just one larger incident is going to traumatize our nervous systems. And there will be a rewiring process as a result of it. But when I think about trauma, I think of too much, too soon. I think not enough for too long. I think too much before you're ready for it. Those are those simple explanations of like when and how does trauma develop and start to be stored up in the body? Like does that fragmentation, that disconnect originate? And especially us as little people, we're always getting very confusing messages, things that don't always add up, like what someone says and their body language, what someone does and what they say, so there's so much confusion. And anytime we get too much too soon, not enough for too long, that starts to look like abuse, trauma, or neglect over a period of time.
I love that. Too much too soon, too little too long.
Mm-hmm.
Great name for a book, by the way. Yeah, so that defines that. So I know with me too, even today, I explained one time, I can get annoyed and not know why I'm getting annoyed.
Yeah.
But instead of getting upset that I'm annoyed, I will be acutely aware of it and try to process it and try and change my mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so would you say that that's something like that people would be working on? I mean, you're saying rewiring, um,
Mm-hmm.
rewiring meaning being
Yeah.
able to sort of process that moment of, hey, I'm aware that I don't like the way I'm feeling right now.
Yes. Rewiring, when I use that term, I'm talking about rewiring neurological networks in the brain,
Okay.
because we develop these networks that lead to unhealthy and unwanted results, and we have to rewire the brain to some degree to allow us choice, to allow us options to know that there is a different wired path now. You can't necessarily unwire the old ones, but you can rewire and develop new neurological networks that lead to healthy and wanted life-giving results. So when I say rewire, I'm really talking about brain chemistry and that process of healing. So the way that we go about doing that in my practice are lots of different therapeutic modalities and techniques. I like to use EMDR as one of them. When I'm, when I'm working with my clients, and it's a way to single out and target just one neurological network at a time. And so people are able to process trauma and desensitize their responses to it on a much more rapid basis than, say, talk therapy, which is very effective. It's just not able to isolate one network at a time. So, but there are a lot of different modalities. I really, especially when you're talking about mood, food, disordered eating, relationship to behaviors, I really like dialectical behavioral therapy, distress tolerance. We talk about the nervous system. And just like you said, we need to understand why our nervous system is dysregulated. That's what's happening. And I think traditionally, even in therapy, people would go to, well, what's happening around you that is causing this? It's not necessarily anything in your environment. Yes, there might be stimuli that is triggering, but it's not necessarily something you can put your finger on. A lot of this stuff is embodied. A lot of this stuff is, neurobiological, it's chemical. You are having a reaction. And so we can't always pinpoint it on, oh, I was having a bad day or so and so upset me. Sometimes we can just get frustrated. Sometimes, especially in menopause and all of these other, things that are happening hormonally and all of that, like, sometimes that's it. That's the antecedent. That's what led to just having some emotional dysregulation. Maybe your temperature just got thrown off and you didn't realize it. Okay. And,
Yeah.
and so that can lead to anger, frustration, claustrophobia, anxiety, all of these things. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice when we're always looking like what has caused this environmentally. Uh, we know that that happens often, but it's not always the only way that we start to get dysregulated in our systems. Mhm.
Absolutely. Actually, it was funny the other day. I was working around the house and then I started getting really hot and then I started getting really frustrated. And I'm going, I know. And I know you say don't look around, but I was aware of the fact that when I get really like hot, sweaty and doing something,
Mhm.
my temper kind of starts to waver. So
It,
that,
it does.
yeah, it does. Oh my gosh. Um, so you did mention MDR. I'm not aware of that term. I might be, but
Okay. EMDR, it's a
EMDR.
therapeutic modality that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And originally it was done with eye movements where you allow the eyes to move back and forth, back and forth. You do that to bring about bilateral brain stimulation. Well, over the course of time, we figured out there's a lot of different ways to, bring about bilateral brain stimulation. So you can do tapping, you can do eye movements. You can do audio, the earmuffs that kind of do a beep in this ear, the beep in that ear, and they go back and forth. The goal is to stimulate both parts of the brain while you're targeting one memory, one network, okay? One negative core belief. And then it is just amazing what happens inside the brain as it starts to reprocess. I think of it as like a hair follicle with split ends, and how it just kind of like splits off. When
Mhm.
you are doing that and targeting that network, it smooths out like a beautiful keratin treatment. And it is absolutely amazing. That's what's happening inside the brain. The effect is where someone says, gosh, it's just amazing how like I just feel further removed from that memory. I feel further removed from any type of sensation or emotion that would come out of that lived experience. So you still have obviously the memory and everything. This isn't hypnosis, but it allows for the effect of desensitizing the emotional response that would come out of a memory that comes from the fragmented network that starts to lead to faulty thinking. Okay. And so it's extremely effective. And, it's so funny. I'll sit with my clients and they just look at me and they're like, I just don't know how that worked. Like, and I don't either, really. I mean, like, I've explained it as best as anyone can explain it, but it really is an amazing modality when you are dealing with childhood trauma, any type of trauma, and a trauma response. Even when you're looking at patterns of behavior that are rooted in a trauma. So it is very effective in my professional experience in the treatment of eating disorders.
Very interesting. Thank you
And
for
so,
sharing that.
oh, yeah, absolutely. So, chemical dependency, behavioral addictions, eating disorders, any type of trauma initiated, process addiction, there are things that you can target and certain techniques that you can use in the realm of EMDR that are very effective.
Wow.
There are different protocols that you can use for different things, and there are specific protocols for that have given some really amazing results. And like I said, it's kind of like, I don't even know how that works, but it does. And then a lot of people really have the fear because they're like, gosh, I feel so great. I feel like a different, person, at least when it comes to that specific, network we were targeting. And they're like, I wonder, how it's going to be in the real world, right? Like next time I encounter so and so, or, things like that. And it's really amazing what they report when they come back. They're like, yeah, I didn't feel the same way when I was engaged in that old, similar, familiar way. So it's really effective.
I
Mhm.
love that. That is really, really interesting.
It is.
Um, and with that, I want to move on a little bit to a couple of things that you do. So you're a speaker and an author. I would like to know about your book. We'll start there, and then we're going to talk about your podcast because
Yes. So I have done a ton of writing, working on finding a publisher at this point for my book. And what we have published right now that I absolutely love, and we're talking to everyone about it, is a recovery journal. And it is called the Plan to Recover Mini Journal for Recovery and Self-Discovery. And this mini journal is a 90-day journal because we look at healing and recovery really when we're looking at 30, 60, 90 days. So much can happen. We're also looking at automating healthy habits and healthy behaviors in a 90-day period. And so we try to break it down that way, but it's a bullet journal in the sense that you've got prompts to follow every day. The difference is when you start your 90 days, you start that 90 days in a very intentional manner, really looking at targeting 3 behaviors, one that you want to engage with more often, or one that you want to disengage with or abstain from for a period of time, or just, take an opportunity to look at that relationship a little closer. Okay. So we develop an AM routine and a PM routine very intentionally to support those 3 new habits for the next 90 days. And then each day you're kind of held accountable to those behaviors and you're looking at the prompts. That's why yes, it's recovery focused, but it's also very self-discovery focused. And we rely heavily in looking at the strengths for the day, which are called our victories. And then we look at our struggles, we look at our triggers, and then we practice giving ourselves grace and also taking a moment to pat yourself on the back and celebrate the things that you did accomplish that day. And so it's just been transformational for me. I developed it for myself. And since it works so well, I figured, gosh, it'll probably work for other people. And as an ADHD practitioner and human, I feel like it really does work for the dopamine deficient brain. And if you are in a recovery process, at least temporarily, you're going to be pretty dopamine deficient. So this is a journal that can be very healing in early stages of recovery.
It's wonderful. I like the AM and PM because this is an interesting thing, and I've spoken to a lot of fellow bulimics.
Mhm.
Um, excuse me. And I could get through the day fine. It was the nighttime, it was the PM. And a
Mhm.
lot of my colleagues that have recovered or are still struggling through it, that is that
Mhm.
time. Of course, a lot of us work, so your daytime, you're busy, you're doing things, but nighttime hits. And
Mhm.
so I like that there's the AM and the PM because I think a lot of people who are struggling with eating disorders, the PM is going to be, very important.
It is. It is. And oftentimes, and I know I'm not talking to everyone who is struggling with bulimia, but oftentimes there is like you get busy, your brain's engaged, you're not necessarily engaging in healthy eating practices throughout the day. You're probably more in a restrictive mode. And so in the evening, it becomes very easy to binge. Very,
Yep.
very, very easy to binge. And your body is starving. And so it's a real challenge. I have found that when it comes to AM and PM, the AM becomes so important to support my PM because half of the things that I'm doing in the morning are supporting that evening routine. And all of them are supporting the three behaviors that I've really decided to hone in on for that 90 days. And so, like, for instance, I always use this example because it's very simple. I was looking for my bottle, but I drink 120 ounces of water a day. And so, if I'm not filling up my water bottle in the evening to walk out the door in the AM, it's not going to happen. And so, everything in the PM seems to support the AM, and then it round and round we go. And so, I have just seen so much value. Not one's more important than the other, but they do support each other. And I think especially early in recovery, you need some wins. You need to
Mhm.
see that you are winning. And it's so important to build those trust muscles with yourself. That's like, I said I was going to do it and I did it. And every single day I chose me. I woke up in the AM and in the PM, I had these moments where I was really thinking about myself, choosing myself, investing in myself. And that's very healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really like that. That's very interesting. I started my bulimia when I was 18, and at 22, I remember having a journal. It wasn't
Mhm.
quite as expansive, and I wish that was there because it would have made it simpler for me. But I also journaled on day to day and exactly that. So, I would start to recover, and more days I would go without bulimia. Unfortunately, life changes, and I was recovering, but then there's a move, and then there's this, and then there's that. Um,
But just
so there's,
that willingness to look at it every day, the
yeah,
willingness to reflect back on it,
yeah,
that's so healing because in any type of early stage, whether you're in pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, no matter where you are in your healing process, there's a little bit of denial. And if you are not looking at it every day, it's just hard to stay on track
yeah,
because that denial kicks in and all those defense mechanisms kick in, right? You know how like the eating disorder talks. It's
yes,
real loud at first, but then the voice gets, stiller and more quiet. But my gosh, it is still there. And it says things like, you don't really need to do that today. That's just really not quite that important. But if you're reflecting back on it every day and you're looking at those struggles, you're like, oh, that eating disorder is still there. It's still showing up in these specific ways in my life. And that's important to reflect on.
yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
And so next we're going to go to your podcast that you have, Direct Impact.
Yeah. So direct impact with Andrea Epting. And we just actually, I think today, we're wrapping up season 5, where we talked about body betrayal. And body betrayal is incredibly connected and linked to disordered eating. And I think it's really important to understand, yes, there are so many experiences in life where other human beings hurt us and betray us, which is an extremely deep wound, especially if they are a trusted other or someone you depended on. But guess what? You trust and depend on your body so much more than you ever will another human being. And when there has been a severing of trust there, all types of things start to happen, a disconnect between body and self. disconnect between your thoughts, your feelings, your gut, and your instincts. All of this starts to transpire. And there's a lot of different forms of body betrayal that happens throughout the lifespan, but nobody's really looking at it. And they're not looking at it from that perspective. And so I developed a recovery process for people to move through, and it's 4 stages. And that's what we go over in season 5 is just brief glimpses at each of the stages of the recovery process and what that looks like. And so I feel like body betrayal and all of that is so important. I link to my story of body betrayal and kind of what led me to start doing this work in that particular realm. And I just feel like it's very important work, especially for people struggling with mood and food disorders.
I absolutely agree with that. It was kind of interesting because while I was bulimic, I used to actually talk to my stomach and I would talk to my organs.
That's
And I'm
good.
fascinated
That's
when I'm
good.
doing things with my hands. I watch
Mhm.
my hands. I'm fascinated about how they can work together and how much they need each other.
That's
And
right.
those are silly things I thought about, my toes and my feet. And, when one is leg is itchy, the other one will help it. And you can rub your one or whatever. How everything works simultaneously together is just phenomenal to me. And I'm thinking, just because I have one stomach, it doesn't mean that it's not working together with my other organs. And so I have to just make it as a one whole. And over time, um, that mattered to me that, this matters and that I can't be, denying and even my heart when it would pound after a bulimic episode, like what, this is the
Mhm.
heart of your body and you're abusing it.
Right.
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 And the brain, I kept telling the brain, you got to understand the rest of it. You're not the headmaster here. Get this stuff out of my head. It's like, the rest of it needs you to function, but you need it for functioning too. So it was, I know I
Absolutely.
sound weird, but
Not
I
at
really,
all. I mean, you sound intelligent to me. And that's what we're looking for is for all of our embodied intelligence to work together, to come back
Mhm.
online and work together. We talk about like the goal being what I call holistic integrity, where all the parts of self are in integrity with each other and talking to each other. And so I love that where it's like, they are talking, and I realize the ways that they are, and just giving it, the credit it's due, I guess.
Absolutely. This is absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate your time on here. I really do want to give you the time to let our listeners know where to find you. That's very important.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I mean, I would go to Amazon. I would go to Amazon first and type in either Andrea Epting, and or you can type in the Plan to Recover mini journal. And I would really look at that and see if a journaling practice that holds you accountable to moving into more wanted instead of unwanted behaviors, if that's something you're ready for. Um, and if you type into the search bar Andrea Epting, you're also going to find the Direct Impact podcast. And I really recommend that you go ahead and check it out, see if you like it. If you like it, then go ahead and start listening to it, subscribe to it so you can see it. We do weekly episodes. And we also do mindful meditations in addition to episodes that really, like I said, season 5 was about body betrayal, but we talk about all forms, mental health, addiction recovery, and just living the best version of your own life so it'll positively impact, yes, self and relationships, but generations to come, because we're looking for that ripple effect that lasts generation to generation. And so it's all about life-giving content. So I think both the journal and the podcast, it's about life-giving content. So that's the best way to engage. You can also go to www.lightninginabottle.biz and check out all the content we have in store that way too.
I love that lightning in a bottle. It's beautiful,
I love
beautiful.
it too as an ADHD person, right? Because I'm like, capture that lightning in a bottle and use it. before it pings off and goes somewhere else. Capture that brilliance and use it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Me, it would be my version because I'm not, I guess I used to be, but I'm calmed down a lot since I hit 60. It's kind of like, psh. But me, I now would be the firefly in the bottle. So,
I love it. I love it. That's beautiful.
well,
Yeah.
thanks again for being here. Really appreciate your time. And that information is just absolutely inspiring. And again, thank you very much. And I will be going to Amazon
Thank you.
because
Thank
even if I'm recovered, I really want to go through that and see how, because I think that even if you've gone through recovery, you can always continue to better yourself in other ways. And I like the victory part of it,
yeah,
right?
I think we're on a recovery journey. We are on
Yes.
a recovery journey. No matter where we are in our stage of healing, there's always something or some things that we probably engage in that we might want to disconnect from, and some things that we might want to add to our life that become really important. I mean, right now I'm on, I think, my ninth journal, maybe 12th at this point. I need to look. And I'm really focusing on Sabbath. I'm really focusing on rest and renewal and prioritizing listening to that still small voice inside of me, being in nature, attuning to self and others in a different way. And that's where the journal has taken me this 90 days. But I think it's an evolution. Mhm.
Absolutely. Again, thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.